Hey, now I love a great recommendation. It can feel like a shortcut to something brilliant. Books, film, TV, anything. But particularly with books, which are such a time commitment, you want to make sure you're going to read something great. So I've turned to YouTube to read the books creators swear by. Now I've done this before to some enormous success, and I found some of the best books I've ever read. I think I've got some great ones on this list today. So I've gone away, I've read them, and I've got some thoughts. Now we're going to kick off with a recommendation from Jack Edwards. You may have heard of him, he's quite a big force on YouTube and his recommendations have served me really well in the past. So this feels like a surefire winner. And I have to say, I was delighted when I saw that Jack was recommending a book from Dostoevsky. Over the past few years, I found myself really enjoying books by Dostoevsky. I read Crime and Punishment, I loved it. Notes from the Underground, I thought it was fantastic. Now I've heard Jack recommending White Nights. White Nights is a short book you can get through in 1 to 2 days, and I did. And you know what? I really enjoyed it. Now I've been in quite a sentimental mood lately, so this book is probably exactly what I needed. There are times when I need a dystopian apocalypse, but there's sometimes when I need a bit of introspective analysis, and that's exactly what I got here. White Nights is a small, aching masterpiece about loneliness and illusion. It takes place over just 4 nights in St. Petersburg, where our main character, known only as the Dreamer, finds himself at a train station where he meets a young lady who's similarly adrift in solitude. Now, over just a couple of days, what starts as a small but tender connection quickly grows into something more, and he finds himself completely in love with this woman. He's soon planning his future with her in his head and kind of dreaming about what could come. But it turns out she's already deeply in love with someone else, and it's not going to be quite that easy. Dostoevsky has a way of writing that is just deeply anchored in the emotions and psychology of the protagonist, and I think that's what I really enjoy about his books. You always know exactly what is going through their heads, even if it comes out as contradictory, rambly, and unstable. And you know what? That probably reflects my own internal monologues. That's probably why I get on with it so well. I just think this does a great job of quickly helping you buy into the character. You understand their motivations, you know their challenges, and you want to help them succeed. In White Nights, the dreamer's internal monologue kind of oscillates between romantic ecstasy and then humiliation as he realises things aren't quite what he thought they were. Like all of the Dostoevsky books I've read so far, the themes are timeless and it holds up just as well today as it likely did nearly 2 centuries ago when it was written. Don't be put off by the fact that this is Russian literature. It's written 2 centuries ago. You might expect it to be a really hard read. It's not. This is really accessible and I really recommend you check it out. Next up, I've got a recommendation from a creator that's quite new to me. His name's Books Are Sick, but I watched a few of his videos and some of the recommendations gelled with things I've enjoyed in the past, so I thought maybe this could be something I'd enjoy. Now, the book recommended to read was The Perks of Being a Wallflower. Now that's a really interesting one for me because I thought I've had this on my to-be read list for ages and I've always intended to get around to it one day. Well, actually, after I purchased it on Kindle so that I could read it on my Kindle, I scrolled down in my library and you know what? I found another copy in my library that I'd already read. Now that might make you think this book is likely to be forgettable. I don't think it is. I think I just read too many books. This is a coming of age book full of teenage angst. It's got a lot of that introspection I was talking about earlier, but maybe a little bit too much. You know what? Some elements of this book I really enjoyed, but some just didn't quite gel with me. The story is told through a series of letters from the protagonist Charlie to an unknown person. In fact, it almost reads as if the letters are being issued directly to you. It's clearly somebody that's not in his life or isn't anymore, but he thinks they would probably care about his story. Charlie isn't the kind of character who bursts onto the scene full of energy. He's a wallflower, somebody who sits back and observes. He doesn't always speak up, but he takes in everything. Charlie's a young man just starting out in high school, but he's grieving a recent suicide. And he finds himself taken in by some seniors in his high school. He discovers drugs, he discovers literature, and he eventually ends up unearthing some of the memories that have troubled him and he's hidden them away. Now, as I say, I do think this might be a bit too angsty for me. If this book had a soundtrack, it would absolutely be early 2000s emo. I think that really shines through in all elements. Some of the decisions made by the characters were a bit hard for me to understand and really see how they could have got to the decisions they made. But I do think it was an enjoyable read. They touch on some really big topics and they do it in a deft, sensitive and appropriate way. Overall, I do think it's a winner, and if you haven't checked it out, you probably should. So the next recommendation I looked at was from another creator that I've also enjoyed recommendations from before. That was Emmy. Emmy recommended a book called 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Now, she actually described this as her favourite book of all time, and she polled her listeners for their favourite books of all time, and it came out top of the list. Now, that is a pretty strong recommendation, so I went into this with the book kind of placed on a pedestal. But I did go in with some warnings. There were many people calling out just how difficult this book is to read, so I knew it could be a bit of a challenge. But some of the books I've enjoyed more than anything else have been described as challenging reads, and I've loved them. So maybe this would be different. Well, actually, this was an incredibly difficult read. Possibly a bit too difficult. Here we get interconnecting stories spanning many generations from different characters, but many of them sharing the same name. Many of them who were alive at the same time, and many that I could not distinguish in any possible way. It tells the story of the Buendia family in the fictional town of Macondo in Colombia. That's a town founded by two of our characters, Jose Arcadio Buendia and his wife Ursula. Now here we see this town start as a bit of a rural utopia, but quickly grow into a troubled city that eventually crumbles in chaos. I just found myself continually lost, not knowing who was doing what and when. In the end, I ended up following some advice I'd found online and kind of reading it accompanied by a diagram of the family tree that made it a bit clearer who was who. And that definitely helped. I recommend you doing that if you're ever going to set out reading this book, but it was still really challenging, even with that. The story was decent, but not quite what I expected. Now, it's described as magical realism, and I can absolutely see where the realism came in. And there was elements of magic throughout, but they kind of glaze over those points. They talk about them almost as if they're just mundane, casual things that could happen at any point, and then they quickly move on. It's really kind of odd, and you could easily miss that anything interesting has actually happened at all. The main theme of the book, which they do a good job of driving home, is that time is cyclical and we are bound to repeat the mistakes of the people that have gone before us. I did enjoy the book, but I'm not sure if I got everything out of it that I really should have. Maybe I should go back to it and read it again. You know what, if I do, I think I would absolutely listen to this on an audiobook. I'm not sure if there is one, but I think a full cast audiobook would make this so much easier to read, with different voices for different characters, so you could quickly identify who is who. If you're up for a challenge, then I can see there is real value in this book, but go in prepared. This one is tough. That brings me to a recommendation from Jared Henderson. Jared Henderson was actually the creator that recommended Crime and Punishment when I first read that, and I absolutely loved it, so I was delighted to read something recommended from him again. And I was similarly pleased when I saw him recommended a book I hadn't read from an author I've enjoyed. That book was Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. Now, I come into this having read The Road by Cormac McCarthy, and it's one of the best books I've ever read. Absolutely fantastic. It's grim, it's dark, and it's powerful. And I really enjoyed that. Now, you could say that Blood Meridian is also grim, dark and powerful, and it is, but it's in a wholly different register. This book was so rough and so grim, it almost didn't relent at any point. It's set in the mid-19th century American Southwest and Mexico. It's about a young man who runs away and he joins a gang of scalp hunters. They are led by the terrifying Judge Holden. They move through towns, absolutely obliterating everything in their path and totally destroying all the indigenous people. The character that really stands out here is Judge Holden. He's clearly got supreme intellect, but an absolute moral void. His speeches are powerful and emotional, but terrifying. The protagonist, the kid, doesn't really get fleshed out as a character, and we don't know what to expect from him. McCarthy doesn't spend much time building out his character. In fact, about 50 to 100 pages in, I thoroughly expected them to kill him off and introduce the true protagonist, someone that they would go on to really develop. But this never happened. We just stay following the kid. Now, in The Road, we follow a father and son, and although terrible things happen and they do terrible things, you absolutely want them to survive. But in this book, I'm not really sure if we want anything positive for anybody involved. The only positive thing we can really tell about the kid is that he isn't quite the same sadist as the rest of the people he travels with. He's just trying to survive, and he thinks his best chance of survival is by sticking with this crowd. I did enjoy it, but it was rough. It was just series and series of violent scenes with nothing to separate them. If you enjoy that kind of thing, then check it out. It might be great for you. But if that sounds like something you might not, then probably avoid it. For me, it was good, but nowhere near the same level as The Road. Next, I've got a recommendation from Daily Stoic. That is Ryan Holiday. You might have seen him talking about Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics and things like that. He's often talking about non-fiction works. But he did recommend a novel. That novel was It Can't Happen Here by Sinclair Lewis. This was an incredibly prescient book. It was written in 1935. It tells the story of a populist politician called Buzz Windrip, who goes on to become the president of America, but he quickly pushes it into an authoritarian fascist regime. Now, this book does that kind of 1984 thing where it blends in a compelling narrative with a stark warning for what could happen. And you know what? It's amazing how many things are called out in this book that actually have happened, particularly over the last 5 or 10 years here in the UK where I am, but absolutely in the US under the MAGA movement. It almost reads like a playbook of tricks to bend the thoughts of the population and push them into decisions they otherwise wouldn't make. The main character, Doremus Jessup, is a newspaper editor who kind of pushes back against this regime and feels the force of it. It just shows how timeless these tactics are, and they just need to be changed slightly to have a real impact on politics. Now, I did enjoy the story, but probably not as much as some of the other books on this list, but it just feels like the kind of book you absolutely should read because you're going to learn from it. The next recommendation I found was Fourth Wing. Now, you've probably heard of the Fourth Wing series. It is absolutely massive. You can't go on YouTube, Instagram or TikTok without seeing someone shouting it out. In this case, the creator I found recommend it was somebody called Emily Jean, but there is loads of people shouting this out. Now, I'm aware of how popular this book is. There's going to be people watching this who love it. This channel isn't about negativity, and I realise that art is subjective. It will be different for everyone, but I have to be honest, for me, this book was terrible. It was so bad. Like, awful. It's described as romantasy. That is epic fantasy where the central plot line is a romantic entanglement between two of the characters. In this case, it's two dragon riding soldiers, Violet and Xaden. Now, I did know going in that this book was unlikely to be for me, but in the past, I've avoided books when they get lots of hype, and it's often been in spite of myself. When I've eventually got around to reading them, it turns out they absolutely lived up to that hype and I should have read them ages ago. So I'm trying to be a bit more open-minded, and I went into it with that mindset. But for me, this one just didn't live up to it. I found the characters poorly formed and the dialogue pretty painful at points. There was just a lack of background and world building behind some really big decisions that were made, and it just felt kind of half-formed. The writing feels simplistic. Now, that's not always a bad thing. I'm not opposed to like young adult books. Sometimes it can make for a really fast-paced, exciting read. But in this one, it just felt a bit too simplistic. I'm going to read you a couple of quotes, and I think they might be some of the worst quotes I've ever read. Here's one. "Because love, at its root, is hope. Hope for tomorrow, hope for what could be. Hope that the someone you've entrusted your everything to will cradle and protect it. And hope, that shit is harder to kill than a dragon." Now tell me that isn't really bad. And I'll just give you another example. "Riders party as hard as we fight. And we fight pretty damn hard." They're just terrible. Now I have to be honest, I felt like I was getting a cringe per page ratio of about 3 cringes per page. I felt like Sideshow Bob when he's stepping on those rakes in The Simpsons. The logic of the book is really hard to get behind. Violet is constantly described as this frail, weak girl, but she's always overpowering these big, burly, trained men. And it just feels a little bit odd. The supporting cast felt weak and it doesn't really get built up. There are a lot of deaths in this book, and I feel like the deaths are supposed to be powerful and moving. But because the characters are so poorly formed, you just don't buy into it. It just doesn't really mean anything to you. Violet talks about the weight and impact of these losses and how it's changed her world, but it's just hard to buy into because they've not really showed up in any way. Now, this might be perfect for you. You might really enjoy it, and that's okay. It just wasn't for me. Now, frustratingly, this is a series of 3 books, and I hate leaving something unfinished, but I just don't know if I can go back to this one. We'll have to wait and see. That brings me to my final recommendation, and this one came from a creator called Bookborn. And this one made it onto the list almost as a bit of a meme because it seemed a bit ridiculous. It's called Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinnerman. Now, I have to be honest, this one blew me away. The premise does sound terrible. The dungeon crawler, Carl, is a bloke dressed just in his boxer shorts who has to fight through a series of demon-filled dungeons, which has the rule set of an RPG game and is being live streamed across the universe. He's accompanied only by his now talking cat called Princess Donut. Now, I realise how bad that sounds, but honestly, it was quite good. This book breaks every rule of good fiction. It tells, it doesn't show. In fact, at the start of the story, we are given a list of rules for the universe in list form. And it is ridiculous, but it's fine because they're playing out in this kind of game style. You need to know the rule set and it feels okay to tell you. We constantly have fourth wall breaking narration telling you exactly what the challenge is and exactly what the stakes are, just handing you everything on the plate. And I was okay with that. The pacing is relentless. It's full of jokes and pop culture references, and many of them land, some of them don't, but if you keep reading for another 10 seconds, you're likely to hit another one, and that might. I have to be honest, when it comes to books, I'm absolutely guilty of judging a book by its cover. I'll often go shopping and just browse for things that look interesting, buy them, and often it leads me to a really good book. Now in this case, this book has the worst front cover I have ever seen. Try and imagine a bad front cover for this book. Well, this one is worse than that. Now, I can tell that they've clearly done this on purpose, but I'm not sure if that will pay off. I bet lots of people will be put off when they see that cover. And in fact, I now know that they've re-released it with an updated cover that's just a bit less offensive to the eyes. Now, I listened to this one. I listened to it on Audible, and the narration was genuinely incredible. It's narrated by a man called Jeff Hayes. Jeff has incredible range. He narrates the entire cast and it feels like a full cast of actors. He does such a good job, particularly of Carl, the protagonist. He portrays him kind of like Stan from American Dad, and that is absolutely perfect for this character. This book won't win any literary fiction awards, and you know what? That's okay. I've actually now blasted through about 4 in this series, and I'm taking a break now so I can read some other stuff, but I'll probably come back to it. It's just easy. It's the kind of thing you can stick on whilst you're doing something else. If you miss something for a few minutes, you're fine. You can pick it back up. It's not going to be a problem. I've really enjoyed it. Now, this won't be for everyone. I think I particularly align with a lot of the references in it, and it just worked for me. If you think it might not be for you, you know what? It probably isn't. Find something else on this list, and there'll be something great for you. Now, that's about it from me. If you've enjoyed that, a like would be appreciated, and a sub to the channel would be amazing. I'd love to see you next time. Thank you very much. Goodbye.